Good morning, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. This is Rich again, back for your first video blog of the day for Monday, July 6, 2015, around 6:21 in the morning, Berwick, Massachusetts. Going to be a nice and sunny day, warm highs in the mid-80s. The humidity is going to be creeping up a little by little today. Tomorrow and Wednesday, a lot of humidity and a lot of sunshine and thunder showers. Could make a run at 90 in Boston's Logan Airport. If they hit 90, it will be the first time this calendar year. Some news to report. The Women's World Cup finals happened last night. USA beat Japan by a score of 5-2. The USA women's team's the world champions in soccer, so congratulations to them. Tri-City beat Lowell Spinners by the score of 6-5, and it's Happy National Kissing Day around the world, so go kiss. And that's about it on the news. My first video subject today is my review of the 1990 WCW pay-per-view Great American Bash New Revolution, which happened at the Baltimore Arena on July 7th, 1990. The main event was Nature Boy Ric Flair defending the WCW World Title against Sting. And in this broadcast, they were mentioning the WCW brand name more than the NWA name, because the NWA name was being phased out around this time. And this is what happened at the pay-per-view. Before the pay-per-view, they had one dark match. It was David Sierra beating Mr. X. Don't know who Mr. X was. He was a masked wrestler, and this is what happened. These are the matches that will happen on pay-per-view. The match was called by good old JR Jim Ross and Bob Caudle. This was his last pay-per-view, Bob Caudle, and he was an underrated announcer. Bob Caudle, he was a long-time Mid-Atlantic, JCP, and WCW announcer. And the first match that happened on the pay-per-view, it was Flying Brian Pillman facing off against Nature Boy Buddy Landau. Very solid match. Went about 9.5 minutes. Pillman went with the flying body cross off the top rope for the 1, 2, 3. Kind of a solid match by two great workers. The next match was Captain Mike Rotundo facing off against the Iron Sheik. This was not a great match at all. Mike Rotundo beat the Iron Sheik in about 6 minutes with a backslide. Horrible match. It had no business on the pay-per-view card. Next match was another match that had no business on the pay-per-view. It was Doug Furnas, that WCW was pushing as kind of a strong man, facing off against Dirty Dutch Mantel, who basically came back to WCW after wrestling in Memphis for many years. It was, kind of awful and stuff. Doug Furnas won for the belly-to-belly suplex in 11 minutes, which this match had no business on the pay-per-view as well. The next match was Harley Race facing off against Tommy Wildfire Rich. This was not a good match at all. Race won about maybe 6 minutes in, because Tommy Rich gave like a front flying body press, and he tried to pin Harley Race, but the momentum switched Harley Race over to Tommy Rich for the 1, 2, 3. Jim Ross in this match kind of made a little bit of a comment on Harley Race's trunks, because he had the King logo on his trunks, and he says, oh, he must be a fan of the Sacramento Kings and stuff. I think that was Harley Race's old trunks he used when he was the King in the WWE and stuff like that. The next match was for the WCW United States Tag Team Championship. It was a Midnight Express, beautiful Bobby Eaton and Sweet Stan Lane with James E. Cornette in his corner, facing off against his Death Southern Boys, which was Steve Armstrong and Tracy Smothers. And this was a solid tag team match and stuff like that. Even though the Midnight Express were heels, they were being cheered by the crowd like crazy and stuff like that, and the Southern Boys were booed kind of right out of the building. And Baltimore's on the Mason-Dixon line, and it was very shocking to see the Midnight Express get face pops. Midnight Express won about 18 minutes and stuff when Bobby Eaton pinned Armstrong with a cradle after Lane kicked Armstrong in the back and stuff like that. The Midnight Express was heavily cheered, and I was very surprised they didn't do like a match between Midnight Express against Doom on this pay-per-view card, because it would have been title for title and stuff. Probably the Midnight Express would play de facto faces in this in the match, but it never came to be. Next match, it was Big Van Vader making his WCW debut, facing off against the Z-Man, Tom Zink. This was only a 2-match, a total squash. Vader beats Zink, which this was just to push Vader as a monster and stuff like that. They should have gave him a lower level wrestler, because Tom Zink was kind of getting a decent push around this time early in the year. He and Pillman were WCW United States Tag Team Champions. The next match was Rick and Scott Steiner, the Steiner brothers, facing off against the fabulous Freebirds, Michael P.S. Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin. This was kind of an average tag team match and stuff. A lot of that back and forth. Ending had Rick Steiner giving Michael Hayes the belly-to-belly suplex after the referee was throwing Jimmy Jam Garvin out of the ring because he was constantly interfering, and Scott Steiner pins Michael Hayes for the 1, 2, 3. There's a decent tag team match, nothing to write home about and stuff. The Fabulous Freebirds at this time was kind of like a team that was, stuck in mid-card, like mediocrity and stuff like that. And the Steiners was still a solid tag team. The next match was Paul Mr. Wonderful Orndorff, the Junkyard Dog, and El Gigante facing off against 3 members of the Four Horsemen, Arn Anderson, Barry Windham, and Sid Vicious. They had Ole Anderson as their manager. This was not a great tag team match at all. Arn Anderson was the TV champion at this time, but this was very awful, this match, and the ending had like the Horsemen interfere after Junkyard Dog was like beating up Arn Anderson, trying to go for a pinfall. Sid Vicious and Barry Windham beat up on Arn Anderson and Paul Orndorff, and then El Gigante comes and scares off all the heels and stuff. El Gigante was not legally tagged into this matchup, and this was very, very awful. Like, the Junkyard Dog was way past his prime. They were naming him the Junk Food Dog. Paul Orndorff came back after being on the shelf for a couple of years, and El Gigante, this was probably one of his first matches. And the Horsemen at this time, like Arn Anderson was, TV champion, but he was suffering from an injury. Barry Windham came back to the WCW, but he wasn't that good. He was all washed up, and they were pushing Sid as a monster and stuff like that, so this was not a great 6-man tag. The next match was for the WCW United States Championship. It was Lex Luger facing off against Mean Mark Callis. Mean Mark Callis eventually became The Undertaker. Mean Mark Callis had Paulie Dangerously in his corner, and this was a great, solid U.S. title match. Luger got Callis in the backbreaker, but Callis escaped and stuff, and then Paulie tried to interfere, and Luger clotheslines him, and then Luger clotheslines Mark Callis and pins him for 1, 2, 3 to retain the United States Championship. A decent title defense by Lex Luger. The next match was for the WCW World Tag Team Champions. It was Doom, Ron Simmons, and Butch Reed with Teddy Long facing off against The Rock and Raw Express, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson. This was kind of an awful title defense by Doom, because The Rock and Raw Express was basically washed up at this point as a tag team. They gave out a decent performance. The ending had like Teddy Long try to interfere, but Robert Gibson punched Teddy Long, and then Butch Reed gives like Robert Gibson the shoulder breaker for the 1, 2, 3, retained that WCW World Tag Team Champions. It would have been better fit if they had like a kind of a title versus title match, the Midnight Express against Doom, with like Midnight Express playing the de facto faces, and he could have had like Teddy Long and James E. Cornette fight them on each other. Probably would be in a double disqualification, but it would have been probably interesting instead of having The Rock and Raw Express at this point, which they weren't great. And then the main event was for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. It was the Nature Boy Ric Flair facing off against Sting. This match was been building since February when the Horsemen kicked out Sting from the group because he got a title shot with Ric Flair, and that was a definite no Horseman ever gets a title shot against Ric Flair if they were in the Horsemen. And then Sting suffers a knee injury when he was trying to climb the clay to get out of Ric Flair, which he needed knee surgery. And then for several months, like, the feud was put on the back burner. But this was a great match, and they had Sting's friends who were the dudes with attitudes, Junkyard Dog, Paul Mr. Wonderful Orndorff, and the Steiner brothers to protect, to be around ringside, so the other Horsemen, Arn Anderson and Barry Windham and Sid Vicious, wouldn't come down and interfere. And they had old Lee Anderson locked by El Gigante, and this was a classic match, back and forth. Horsemen tried to interfere, but the dudes with attitudes beat them up. And then Ric Flair goes for the figure 4 leg lock, but Sting counters it and reverses into small package. 1, 2, 3. Sting becomes the new WCW World Champion. The fans go crazy and stuff like that. Baltimore's hot. Sting holds the belt, and this was probably going to be the start of the passing of the torch for Sting to be the next great WCW World Champion. But that never came to be because during his title reign, he flopped as world champion and had to go back to Ric Flair 6 months later and stuff. And this was a great moment. What did I think about this pay-per-view? Besides the Sting versus Ric Flair match, which was an A+, this pay-per-view was basically a one-match show because the others were, decent. Couple of the matches before the main event was decent, but the rest of the card was basically awful and stuff. And some of these matches shouldn't have been on the pay-per-view. It was basically kind of a Clash of Champions type card on a pay-per-view, which is not good. And I would give this pay-per-view an overall of a C. If it wasn't for the Flair Sting main event, it probably would have been an F and stuff. And tomorrow I'm going to reveal probably what was called the worst pay-per-view in professional wrestling history, no matter what organization. Great American Bash 1991 from Baltimore, Maryland, Legend versus Legacy, but that never came to pass. I'll tell you about that more, and later on today there'll be 2 more video blogs. One will be about memories of the game show block I had of USA Network, tell you how good that was. And the third and final video blog of the night will be about actor and musician, former host of Match Game, Hollywood Squares Hour, John Bowser Bousman. Have a good day, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Bye now.